I actually feel very lucky that I was left to my own devices. Because I'm thinking back into what got me interested in all of this in the first place. And I have a very distinct memory of looking out a window at my neighborhood, at the houses, and just feeling, evil is too strong a word, but I felt like something was disordered. There's something about the world that was inherently antagonistic towards me. And with hindsight, we can say it's projection, it's something, whatever it is. I still had this feeling that something was wrong. And as I lived my life more, I noticed that other people didn't necessarily have that feeling. And I think a lot of them just sort of sedated themselves with things, with distractions, with these anodynes. They were curiously empty to me too. And so that's why I feel lucky that nobody tried to inscribe a certain system on me. Nobody sat me down and said, this is a system you have to follow or you're a bad person. I'm left to my own devices. And the other things that I started to notice that were, I guess, wrong, disordered, felt off, all these circumstances in which I was meant to be enjoying myself and were supposed to be satisfactory, like getting drunk and, destroying your eardrums and being in all these clubs and bars and everything. It eliminates the nuance of conversation. It eliminates the commingling of people and their ideas because everything is so loud and everything is focused around an activity that does everything but the bond that you're trying to form. And things being loud and, drinking and drugs being everywhere, it all just seemed as a way to sedate the actual communication between people. And I started to think, well, maybe that's what's causing this disordered feeling in the world, is that the minute that anyone is beginning to feel something loud or something undeniable has to include itself in the conversation before we can actually meet anywhere. And people were just sort of stunted from what they were actually going to accomplish. And then when I started to think about, and this is really funny to me because how do I convince people that money and monetary policy and the very existence of it is sort of the heart of everything? It's such a niche thing, and where's the human story? Where's the narrative in it? And what it was is I could liken it to Feynman, one of the very famous physicists on the Manhattan Project. There was a time when I think that they were either about to set off the gadget or it was already set off, where he was like one of, 200 people in the world that actually knew about the weapons and the devices. And he would walk around, large cities and even, anywhere USA. And he would just think like, well, look at this entire world around me and it can be gone in an instant, in like a flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns, in a fireball that no one could even conceive of. Like the destruction entirely unknown to human minds, and still isn't really. It's completely incomprehensible. And he just had this feeling that it's all pointless. It can all just evaporate in a moment. And so when you start messing with the money, and I think that Christians cannot support fiat money, by the way, because thou shalt not steal, but also don't bear false witness. When the interest rate is 0%, you're basically telling the economy and economic actors that there is an infinite amount of savings in the economy. And people begin to live their lives on the assumption that there is infinite savings. And you run into these issues, obviously, stagflation. So that's when you have economic stagnation where nobody can fucking find a job and everyone's getting evicted, but inflation just keeps going up and up and up. And that is all caused by just printing money, by whichever way that you do it. And so the actual mechanics of it, they're complicated, but they're not complicated because they're complicated to obscure what they're doing. Thieves come in the night, right? A process of mass theft is not going to be transparent. But there's this old, and I think it was actually Ludwig von Mises that talked about this, but this parable of Ivan and the bricklayer, or Ivan the bricklayer. And all that it is a fella that is going to build a subdivision, and he has 100,000 bricks to do it with. And when you print money, when you mess with the interest rate, although there's only 100,000 bricks, you're really telling him that there's 1 million bricks. And so he starts building far more houses than can actually be finished. And what that means is you get a malinvestment where, say that he starts building 50 houses when he should only be building 10. And then when the real bricks run out, and that is actually like the actual goods and capacity of the economy to do anything, to actually exist sustainably. He started 50 houses, but he's just got 50 foundations, and then whoops, you're out of bricks. And the price signals and the interest rates, that is the 1 million bricks. And that is what we're living through right now. That is the basis of economic cycles. That is the whole theory of the business cycle. There's all of these narratives and distractions that tell you this is what it is, and it's derivatives or it's speculation. And all of this stuff, although important and are just volumes and novels in and of themselves, it's not addressing the root issue where it's just money is a measurement tool. It is a language of effort across time and a store of value and a way to even know what you're doing in the world, what you're orienting yourself with. And it's not a dry theory. Like, whenever they build some bullshit, like, they really ought to start talking about things in terms of the human cost. So, like, we built this library in Calgary, which is just a giant fucking parking lot or like a giant fucking parkade, like a parking garage, a concrete monstrosity that's holding books. Okay. And it's bullshit. It's loud. It's echoey. It contains like the functions that it actually has could be done for like 1/100th of the cost. And frankly, e-readers are just as good as book now. It doesn't matter. But when we say like $250 million, you have to understand that, like, what does a kid cost? $200,000. I don't know the math, but like, when we build some bullshit, just say, that's 100 kids that could have been born. That's 1,000 kids that could have been born. And you robbed the population to build yourself a temple. And it is every life that could be had without frustration. It's literally you not sitting with your head in your hands thinking, how the fuck am I going to pay rent? How am I going to make ends meet? How am I going to fix my car? They don't speak of the actual human cost of that. And that is what inflation and monetary policy has to be to people. It is not just maybe we can tweak this. It's like, no, people are fucking dying because you are lying about how much wealth actually exists in the economy for short-term gain. And that nobody speaks in these terms, that is one of the largest tragedies, because every problem that you can think of is downstream of this. And so when I'm thinking of just what got me into this, I suppose that is the sort of background malaise that I see in the world, because on the uncanny valley, where you can tell people are not quite human, and you know how you can sense stress in people, and you can sense that there's something wrong just from like the micro expressions in their faces, because we spend millions of years just staring at each other and basing all of our decisions upon what somebody is showing you. And people are not happy, and people are not in a good place. They are not feeling good, and you can tell. And everyone is walking around seemingly with this feeling like something is deeply wrong. Our needs are not being met. And it all comes back to that. And of course, be suspicious when somebody tells you that all of the problems in the world are based upon this one single linchpin. Naturally be suspicious, because the world is nuanced. People are nuanced. Systems are nuanced. They're complex. But if you take the largest coordinating thing in the universe, which is money and the monetary system, and you disorder it and you inflate it and you destroy its ability to actually tell people what they're doing, it's almost as though you're just you're changing day and night. You're changing all of these things that people locate themselves by. All the decisions they make are based upon this. You've changed a very fundamental facet of the human experience. And I think that, much in the same way that you can't just ignore your erotic life. Except for very few people with hormonal issues, you have to be able to figure out what you're going to do when you fall in love, what you're doing with your sex drive, how that's sustainable across time. And it's the same thing with your sense of purpose, what you actually do in the world, what you're actually waking up for, what you live for. You can't just ignore that. I mean, there's this really shitty trick where you wear a wedding ring to a job interview. And the reason for that, one, it's sort of a signal to, if you're being interviewed by women, that you've been chosen by another woman, and that shows them that you're worthwhile subconsciously. But at the same time, it also shows that, so if you're just a bachelor, what do you have to live for exactly? And I've seen it where you're just buying more and more shit. You're buying a lot of really high-end equipment, and you're buying a lot of recreational vehicles, and you're investing in bullshit hobbies your mid-condition Charizard or whatever people buy. I mean, I feel like I pick on Funko Pops too much, but you understand the idea. It's just these material things, then you're Citizen Kane in a mansion, and you're just whispering for Rosebud as you slip into death. That is what you're trying to avoid. So they like to hire family men, or at least the real world does, because there's an undeniable thing where obviously you love your kids, and that will convince you to act in a way that is appropriate to providing for a family. If you're just some guy, you proceed possibly with a nihilism about life. And that's not true for everybody, but if you really think about it, once you reach a certain age and you're not providing for anybody and you have no grand purpose, when things get tough in a job, there's I know that I'm a neoliberal shitlord, but that everything is a cynical transaction between people, but I'm not. There always has to be this layer of goodwill between people. And it's sort of this, it's sort of the X factor. It's the secret sauce to what makes everything work. And when it comes to actually bearing bad times, and in workplaces or just in life, there has to be this thing that pulls you through, even if you absolutely hate it. And that is the thing that drives it, that centers it. And if you don't deal with that, if you don't actually establish your sense of purpose, you will just... It doesn't matter what it is. It's consumerism, it's drinking, it's eating way too much. And, to people that are addicted to these things and eating terrible food and getting no sleep and just destroying themselves, obviously have pity for them. But you have to understand that, it's not something that you can embrace. There's something deeply, deeply wrong there. And if you love people that do that, you have to tell them that they're destroying themselves. And if they don't get the message, you simply do have to isolate yourself from them, because you can't be dragged down with them. I mean, try, but it's just, you can't embrace that. Life is far too important to be wasting time on people that will potentially drag you down, that cannot be relied upon. And it's sad and it's horrible, but that's just the way that it has to be. You don't have an infinite amount of time, and you don't have an infinite amount of responsibility to other people. You're charitable, and you help out more than you should. And that which is not necessarily immediately beneficial to you, you have to help them out. But at a certain point, you got to cut it off. And there's also this thing about you need to deal with the infinite and the divine, because when you talk to atheists, and even I being atheistic at a point, and even though I'm, edging towards agnostic and so on, it's a little more complicated than that. But you don't just forget about the fact that you are going to die and that you don't know where it began and where it ends. If you don't have a system of dealing with that, with finding peace with it, you are just going to distract yourself with entertainment, with eating and drinking, all of these pointless proxy activities that leave you, they don't leave you happier, they leave you older. They don't leave you fulfilled. It's just time spent doing something else so you don't have to think about something difficult. And we also need narrative. And narrative, I think, has a very special function. And it's almost like it's a part of our psychiatry. We have to... This whole thing about denial and compartmentalization and repression and all of that, these didn't come out of nowhere. So Chesterton's fence is this analogy for these kind of things where if you come across a fence, don't immediately pull it out of the ground. Actually find out what its purpose is. It may be keeping something in, it might be keeping something out. But if you come across something that has obviously been put there willfully, you have to question why it's there. And when it comes to repression and compartmentalization, they existed for a purpose, because a lot of life is bearing pain so that you can just not be screaming 24/7, and to not assume everything is pointless and useless, and to not be emotionally volatile in situations where you actually have to keep it together. Dealing with uncertainty and just being able to ignore things. And it's a temporary measure, and it's a very useful measure, but it is sort of like the fight or flight response. You know, your adrenaline spikes and you release all this blood sugar, and you have the ability to survive being attacked by something hairy with claws, whatever. But the long-term physiological effects of stress, you know, your bones getting thinned and your collagen breaking down, you know, existing in this emergency exigent circumstance all the time leads to a lot of chronic health issues. And so does repression, and so does compartmentalization. It's not a permanent feature. It's not something that you should embrace as a permanent solution. It's a survival mechanism. And things get pretty crazy when you spend a lot of time denying and compartmentalizing. And so the way to undo compartmentalization, a way to stop the self-denial, a way to just understand, like, yes, I need to find some way of dealing with death and love and purpose and the lack thereof. I can't just ignore it any longer. That is where narrative comes in. So when I think of the Bible and whether or not it's true, like, I've always really cringed when people try to tell me that the historical record for Christ is manifold, and, you know, it's corroborative, and there's evidence of it. It's just, I don't care. The Bible and Christianity and God are one of those things that exist in permanent paradox. You don't need to collapse them. I don't need proof, and I don't need disproof either. It just, there's something about those words that speak to me, and they come to me. And that's all that I need. I don't need to debate whether or not the world is 6,000 years old, what Noah did. It instructs me as it does, and I'm receptive to it. And that's it. I don't care. I don't care. It is not an earthly institution. You can't litigate God, much in the same way that you can't litigate love. You can't litigate purpose. You either have it or you don't, and it exists suspended somewhere in the sky above you, and that's just the way that it works. It was the way with the sun, it was the way with the moon, it's the way with everything else. It just exists, and that's it. And you wonder too, what are you trying to get away from? And so with narrative, it is this thing where it's like a back door where you can, if there's a story that you're too uncomfortable to tell inside, if it'll destroy you, if it'll rip you apart, you have a way to explore these ideas and explore these conflicts and these pressures within you without actually having to stare at them directly. You know, you kind of think about like angels concealing themselves as people because their actual forms are horrifying and incomprehensible to men. So you, it's a way, like it's a safe sandbox, it's a safe staging ground for all of these things. And it's comforting in the sense that, like, obviously you see your internal world mapped out in narrative, and you see it mapped out in the stories of others. And there's just enough plausible deniability where you can deal with it and you can feel it, but you don't have to really feel it. It's a paradox. And I think of the Bible in that a lot of ways. It's like this way to get around the inner stress. because you've obviously got a stress about dying. You've got a stress about the fact that you don't know where you come from. You don't know what your purpose is. But there's this thing, this narrative that lets you see yourself as though a mirror, but not one that is so bright and so accurate that it causes you to recoil. And it's the same thing with stories, and it is the same way with poetry and the communication between people. Because I can't actually give you my exact sensory and intellectual conscious experience. So even in this, I'm providing you a narrative. I'm providing you a story. And, I remember every so often I would be in charge of like an ad campaign or something. And people need to hear a story. Tell them a story. Just like, what the fuck? I don't know. Tell them a story about what? But that's obviously like a crushing down of something more complex. But that's just it. It's a story. It's a narrative. And that is one of these sort of technological layers that we've developed around ourselves. Like, animals will follow instinct until the point of death. They'll just keep going because they don't really know any better. Whereas human beings, we have this ability to negotiate with the animal brain and then the divine brain, the conscious brain, the thinking brain. And narrative is a necessary part of our psychiatry. Like, we go insane without narrative. It's almost like, an infant dies without touch. An adult dies without a story. They go insane without a story. And, thinking about conspiracy theories, I don't want to give the impression that I have any ill feelings or am against people that believe in grander narratives or think that there's sort of shadowy forces in the world that are controlling everything. The first thing I'll say is just like the people that are willing to look outside themselves, so to question their own motives, and who genuinely care if what they're doing is good or bad, if they're doing right by people, if they're actually thinking about how they operate in the world and how they think, and don't believe the first thing that they're told because it's convenient or it's comforting. Those people are precious. And it is a necessary consequence of that awareness and that care that you are incredibly open to being either told a story or inhabiting a story because you're so desperate for a cohering narrative to explain things to you. And we don't focus on how crazy it gets or how complex it gets. That's not what the focus should be on. It should be the fact that you actually care in the first place. That is what's important. The fact that you see something wrong, you feel something wrong, and you're not satisfied to just sedate yourself with entertainment, with libations, so to speak, without, drinking and just consuming, right? That is the most important part. So if I see somebody that really cares a lot about conspiracies, first I'll say, yes, there are loads of conspiracies. I live in one all the time. Monetary theory and what has been done to money and how it is destroying the world and how, even in a functional economy, you don't know the parts that are sort of infected. You don't know the parts that shouldn't exist, that are like there's whole subdivisions, there's buildings and industries that exist for the mere fact that we've lied about the actual accumulated wealth of a society. The fact that nobody knows until it blows apart, until it collapses, nobody knows. And that is a very frightening prospect. Now, I won't be a doomer because the breakdown is part of the healing. The tearing apart and the correction of malinvestment. You see, I don't want a system to collapse because, oh great, there's no pressure on me anymore. I can just degenerate. Whatever happens. I don't have to feel or think anymore or care because the system is falling apart. No, it's because I just want to get to work and living my life in a way that, like, there's that quote from Proverbs. Better is a dry morsel with quietness than a house full of feasting with strife. And what I mean by that is it just bothers me so much when the world is disordered and things don't mean anything and when it's not peaceful, when it's not working. I don't care how palatial and wealthy everything is. I just want it to be honest. And that means a society where the economic system is not a complete lie, where it is not a false reality. And so that is a conspiracy in and of itself. I mean, it's very well traceable. But the problem is that much like I've said about the relationship with God, where, your God is kind of your parents until you find a way around your relationship with them, so is the thing with conspiracy. Now, when it comes to the government, I've long maintained, and this gets proven more and more the more that I deal with them, is that there's not really shadowy, intelligent figures. It's just people that are doing whatever they can get away with at the end of the day. And there's also this idea that they're parasites. And a good parasite, an evolved parasite, because, politicians are not better than you, but they're better at navigating the political system than you. And an effective parasite is one that doesn't kill the host. It's a symbiotic relationship. You, as the host, thrive and live your life and eat all the grass, whereas this parasite is just getting something for nothing. And that is the ideal state of the parasite. So the parasite never wants to hurt the base society so much that it can't create anything. Much in the same way that you live better than a king did 600 years ago. And in a lot of ways, you probably live better than most of the upper party of North Korea, for instance. They know that they can't kill the golden goose. Just shave off their bit of the golden egg every day, and that's great. So when it comes to really draconian things like, surveillance states and social credits and hate speech laws, and basically creating laws that give them the pretext to basically do anything that they want, those they can put the laws in the book, but they're mortified and they're scared of enforcing them because, whenever you want to think about how strong the government is, just remember that every major city in the West is taken to its knees by 1,000 to 2,000 homeless people. You definitely can't, you definitely can't make a mess anywhere you want. That's illegal. You can't loiter. You can't smoke fentanyl on a train. You can't shoot up in a public park and then pass out. Those are all illegal. Okay? Doesn't matter. All that it takes is a small sliver of the population not following the rules and the system collapses. Because most of the government's power comes from your cooperation with their laws. So yeah, they can have surveillance bills on the books. Oh, they can have those. They can have the ability to seize all your assets at a whim, and they have forever, actually. They can have secret courts, and they can have windowless vans, and they can have whatever horrifying boogie monsters you can really think about the government has. They're not going to use them because, much in the same way that good times create weak men, good times create weak statesmen. A Pinochet or whatever dictator you can think of is a very rare phenomenon. 1 in every million politicians even has the ability of becoming that evil in whatever way you can think of. And so practically speaking, it's not that big of an issue. Now, when it comes to conspiracies, every conspiracy is your parents until you've worked out your relationship with them. And so, it's your parents and it's your community too, and it's your friendships and your relationships. If you really think about so who is it that punishes you the most for speech? Who is it the most that demands that you think a certain way? Who is it that demands loyalty and fealty to the system? It is always the people closest to you, not the people most remote from you. These are the people that censor you in these quiet moments. These are the people that demand that you think and act a certain way for their emotional stability. They're the ones that have this sword, this dagger of Damocles hanging over your head if you say the wrong thing. It's these small relationships. And until you actually have relationships where you can say whatever you want, anywhere you want, where you can have all the things that you hope for as a sovereign citizen, right? Like privacy and the ability to keep what you've earned and the ability to move freely and to live wherever you want. And, you know, just the general spectra of pursuit of happiness. Until you have all of those things from the people in your life, you're not going to get it from the political sphere. And indeed, a population that tolerates these private tyrannies will be already primed to have to lay down for greater tyrannies. A population that is strong, like, you know, we talk about this thing about how America can never be invaded because there is a gun behind every blade of grass. Well, as I've said, every time that there is a strong psyche and people who are actualized and self-advocating and are strong-willed enough to say no to the most intimate relationships, the government stands no chance. Because they're downstream of everything. A government, what a government does, despite stealing all your shit and acting like they're hot shit, despite not being even slightly productive, what they do is there's a functioning society that exists, and they come in and they throw a carpet on the ground, and they walk in and they say, yes, I have created this, and you owe me everything because I have made this happen. I was 10,000 miles away when you were, you know, tilling the soil and watching your kid die and building a log cabin against, you know, -40 snowstorms. But, you know, I am the one that made all this for you. I protected you from all of these enemies. It's me. That's what they do. So they can only claim credit for what exists in the first place, which is your blood and toil. And they can take advantage of your being sort of taken advantage of in small ways and being programmed to being this way. So it's all a matter of, yes, there are people that are always working against you in very predictable ways. And to be strong enough to repel them and to not automatically accept them. Because, again, like, it's the whole point, like, psychological operations don't need to happen if what they're trying to give you is already felt and known by you. So the mere fact that anybody's trying these things against you means that they know that there's a chance it can work. And if you give them no chance of it working, if you can say exactly what you feel to people around you, and you're not abandoned for that, and indeed you abandon those who give you these Faustian bargains of agree with me or never hear from me, when you do that, that's when you're free. That's when the freedom starts. And you can only have good attention to what is actually wrong in the world when you've actually done the things that you can most control, because that is one of the most self-actualizing things. Like, no matter what happens in the world, one of the greatest points of hope is that even if the world has gone to hell, you still have freedom every day. Every time that you open your eyes to the sunlight, you have the ability to do the best that you can for yourself, which means you can eat well, which means you can learn, which means you can read, which means that you can actually, you know, one of the beautiful paradoxes that I inhabit is every day I wake up and I know exactly what I have to do. And on the same token, every day I wake up and I know exactly what I have to do. It's to orient yourself correctly also means that you have to feel the shame of not doing the most that you can. And that is one of the reasons that people avoid responsibility, is because now you have to do it. Like, once you've actually got your shit together, and once you've actually meditated properly on this, and once you've actually embraced the actual psychiatric conclusions and have become fully actualized, you know, most people are actually quite capable of sorting themselves out and orienting themselves correctly. But then it's a responsibility, and it's one you can't deny. It's one that you can't ignore. And, you know, I think one of the reasons that really mentally healthy people do not drink to excess and do not, you know, eat for comfort and do not engage in a lot of these depressive, sedating activities is because it never works. You can't eat enough. You can't drink enough. You can't party enough. You can't scroll enough to get rid of your knowledge of knowing that exactly what you have to do in the world to make things right. To make yourself happy, to give yourself the best chance despite all the chaos of it. That is why people avoid it. And that is sort of one of the tragedies, but that is where narrative comes in. And I consider psychology and psychiatry to be part of narrative. It is this layer beyond us that allows us to remove all these internal blocks, because the internal blocks of compartmentalization and repression, they were necessary. And it's really funny the way that, even like adults, and I'll tell you this, like, if fellas, if you let your mother dress you down in front of a woman, they're not going to respect you. They're just not. To show yourself as being like, and it's not even a matter of like being deferring to your family. It's not that. It's the fact that they can erase you with, like, I've seen it happen a lot where even very experienced, very confident women, like, 35 to 40, they've accomplished a whole bunch of shit. And I've seen this in person where like a bunch of like teenagers and 20-year-olds will show up, and the woman just like slumps and collapses, and her body language just regresses 20 years because that stimulus just reminds her, nah, you're not shit. You haven't dealt with any of this. And you can really see it when young people show up around older people, how they become very, they've moved on in their lives, but they haven't really dealt with the part of them that feels ashamed about that. And so it's just, if you allow your parents to speak to you in a way that just erases all of your confidence, it just tells the world that you haven't dealt with yourself, and that there is always this little eject button that can be pushed within you that can cause you to capitulate on anything. And I think that the subconscious, at least of women, will say, okay, so I'm gonna bind myself to this guy, I'm gonna have kids with him, and then an institution or his family will call veto, and I'm no longer the most important thing in his life, and I'm no longer going to be protected. Now, it actually works in the opposite. Like, men should have this towards women too. Like, if you, because it's not considered as cringe when a woman is like, she takes a phone call from her mother no matter what, and a mother beckons and she comes. Like, that is also crazy. And I feel that we do a disservice to the human race by letting women get away with that. It's just as cringe, and it's just as indicative of a disordered worldview and a person that has maintained a sort of immaturity across time. And I won't pick on the mothers, obviously. It's fathers too. It's both parents that a potential like lifelong partner sees your parents talking to you in a way that is incredibly disordered, because, this is apparently a very, very special relationship. And you would think, well, they're not even giving you the same respect that they would give strangers or coworkers or their bosses. They're not treating you like somebody who they have an enhanced and special responsibility to. And at the same time, they say you, not necessarily defending them against their parents. And it just continues the entire cycle. And then you think, well, potentially having children with this person, I'm potentially marrying this person. Like, am I marrying a person, or am I marrying their entire family? And why would I want to get involved with a family where people are not treated as individuals with rights and feelings and their own desires? And then I think, well, children get into the picture, and then, you're not responsible for your child. Now it becomes this entire network of people that don't treat their own children well. So now you have to navigate this disordered familial relationship, and now it's coming into your family. So this is not supposed to be hopeless. It's just, you have to think about where this cycle stops, what control you have over, because people are always going to try to teach you and your children and your friends with disrespect and overriding. And it's not to despair at that, but just when you have the ability to directly control and directly confront these disordered relationships, you absolutely have to, because that's the only way that the system stops. Now, as I'll say, like, it's not a matter about shaming people. It's just having a quiet, respectful conversation with them. Like, listen, I think that your parents obviously have way too much authority over you, and it's not a collaborative relationship. It doesn't feel like anybody's earning themselves here. It looks like they've just sort of there's a sort of Pavlovian training where you just do whatever they say because you're conditioned to do so. And that is not something that I respect. And that is not something that I, as your friend, think is good for your psyche going on long term. And the most important part is that I feel like you may develop that relationship with children of your own. And that's not a reciprocal relationship. And you have to call it out so you don't repeat it. You have to interrupt the generational trauma of sort of this soft enslaving of your children and this psyop against your children. And it'll affect them politically, right? It'll affect their life choices. Like if you install like this little emergency release in their head for their will and their confidence, somebody else can take over that. And, it could be their boss. It could be an abusive relationship. It's not just a matter of, making I am strong and I can't be messed with. It's not an ego thing. It is a civilizational existential threat when people do not have reciprocity in the relationships, when they're not treated with respect, when they're given programming that has them not treat other people with respect. When we talk about Plato's cave, guess what? You are the shadow puppet. You are the observer. You are the light. You're the cave itself. It's all you, man. It's all you. And you have complete control over yourself. And so when we think about the conspiracies and the shadowiness, we would think that we're merely the innocent observer, when you have to understand that we're party to it. We're part of it. We help them. That is sort of the greatest trick of the state and of bad actors, is that you're really doing all of the work yourself. And they're just taking credit, or they're just pushing it a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, you think about, I'm reading this book about the building of Stonehenge, and they go into exhaustive detail because this is the same guy that wrote Pillars of the Earth. I forget his name, but but when they're talking about moving these monoliths, the stones, we've all seen Stonehenge, how, tons and tons of bluestone are moved by like these tiny little points of leverage, right? Like you can think of like a car driving at hundreds of miles an hour, and then it's a single rock in the road that changes the direction. So the placement of that rock or that lever or that fulcrum or pivot point, that is the government. It's sort of like this judo move where they use your own inertia against you. Your power is their power, and their deftness and their skill is all about being a tiny, tiny inflection point that moves something great, which is you and your psyche. And so I suppose I'm always thinking about this idea about, every system that we've had has sort of failed in a way, right? Like, its downfall was baked in 0 day, they call it, where it's a flaw that is already there to begin with. Because you have to think about systems ambivalent of time, outside of time. Systems are sort of a fourth dimensional thing that you have to look at a pinpoint. It's an odd thing to collapse for. Well, that is projection. That is telling the future. That is prediction. That is essentially what you're taking a four-dimensional thing and then collapsing it into something you can observe at the moment. So if we look at Western society and all of the precepts and everything from the Greeks onward, and then we really look at what's happened to it, we realize that there's a flaw there. And I can't tell you what the huge flaws are, like what the ultimate linchpin of it is, but what I can say is just this idea that we think that we can compartmentalize the layers. So the self, the relationship, the family, the community, and then it goes all the way up. And I think that is the primary mistake that we've made that we have to correct, where we think that these layers do not communicate with each other, or we don't think that they communicate as strongly as they do. And I think that is the ultimate flaw that we need to start working on. When it comes to, when I reference the Bible and Christianity having this great effect on Western society, one of the things that I was thinking about most was just the idea that, no matter what station we have in life, there's this idea that we're all fallen, or that we're all sinners, and that we're all imperfect, and compared to the creator, so to speak. And I'll make it more of a secular argument, but just this idea that no matter who we are or what we accomplish, we're all made of the same stuff. We're all subject to the same liabilities. When you talk about original sin, well, I think maybe just view that as an analogy for the fact that we have passions that are capricious, and we have moments of confusion and of being less than charitable and faltering. And no matter where we are, we always have those. No matter how rich you are, you're going to die. And you don't know where you came from, and you need a sense of purpose, and even the ability to find that purpose. And you have to deal with love in whatever way you can. And none of these pillars of a narrative, of course, like what story you tell yourself about yourself, and what story you tell yourself about the world, these all have to be dealt with, and they can't be repressed, and they all flow into each other. And they're the current on which your entire life floats. And no matter who we are, that is how I view this idea of being fallen. The idea of being cast out of Eden and having free will and choice. It is just a matter of whatever there is, you have to deal with it. And there's no distracting yourself from it.